I'm going to craft an essay about love, I feel it pertinent as an essayist to offer up my own personal perception at the onset. Perhaps this will better inform you of where I'm coming from, or maybe it's redundant altogether. But nevertheless, this is where we're going to start. What is love to me? I think love is personable. It's almost kind of indescribable. It's hard to communicate true feeling from one individual to the next. And I think ultimately it's kind of mercurial as well. Better yet, I also think, even though it's mercurial, I think it's also profoundly sort of personal. It's respective to each individual. But how do we communicate our understanding of something as abstract as love to one another? And I think this is where art comes into play. But let's talk about love in the literary sense. One of my favorite quotations is by T. Lawrence. He writes in his poem to S.A., "I loved you, so I drew these tides of men into my hands and wrote my will across the sky and stars." This is a grand statement, grand on a macro scale, but it's also profoundly personal. Literature helps us to convey what we may not be able to convey normally in a regular conversation. In this essay, we're going to examine a variety of depictions of love and understandings of love. We're going to look at a set of sonnets and poems that are augmented by contemporary selections of film and music. In this essay, we're going to examine love through a variety of sonnets and poems by two specific authors, Lady Mary Roth, and by the very utterance of the word sonnet, you probably know who the second is, and it's the bard, William Shakespeare. The first we're going to talk about is Lady Mary Roth, born on October 18, 1587. Or what I like about the Oxford National Biography is that it says probably 1587. So we don't exactly know when she was born. She's the eldest daughter and eldest surviving of the 11 children of Robert Sidney. But what's most interesting to me about her biography, or at least in relation to her family tree, is that she's a cousin of Sir Walter Raleigh. But when it comes to Lady Mary Roth, what's important for us is that she was the first known Englishwoman to write a sonnet. As Johnson's claim to copy or ascribe one of her sonnets indicates, these poems were first circulated in a manuscript among her private friends. And this is the manuscript that we're actually going to look at, Pamphylia to Ephilanthus. And we'll look at the etymology of that later. It was a holograph manuscript of about 117 sonnets and songs, and is now held at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. One of the things that makes her seminal work so important was not just the fact that she was the first Englishwoman to publish a sonnet, let alone a collection of sonnets. It's that it inverted the archetypical norm by making the narrator of the sonnets a woman. Let's take a brief moment to look at the etymology of her work, Pamphylia to Ephilanthus, and I keep having to look at the title because it's extremely difficult to remember. Pamphylia refers to a name that means all-loving, whereas Ephilanthus refers to the lover of two. And we'll examine this when we look at the sonnets and see in one sonnet in particular, where she's in love with two people at once. Before we look at the heavyweight champion of literature, William Shakespeare, let me back up for a moment. When I say that I'm an English major, three things probably immediately come to your mind. One, you probably assume that I'm studying to be a teacher, which is not accurate at all, and most English majors probably don't even study to become teachers. The second is that I probably won't have a career after college, because that's oddly counter to the first archetypical notion of an English major. And the third is that I know a lot about William Shakespeare. But the third is, it's the right one. Every English major learns a lot about Shakespeare. And we talk about the Bard a lot in class, and he's fascinating to learn about. And you could call him the heavyweight champion of literature for no reason. Even non-English majors know William Shakespeare. They can quote William Shakespeare without necessarily even knowing what play or sonnet that they're quoting. And one of the sonnets that we'll look at here in a little bit is one of the most popular sonnets that he wrote, and his first line is probably one of the most well-known lines in Shakespeare outside of to be or not to be, which is probably the most seminal Shakespeare quote. As with Lady Roth, there's a little uncertainty about William Shakespeare's birth as well, except we definitively know the year for Shakespeare, which is 1564. We just don't quite know what day. It could be the April 21st, 22nd, or 23rd. He's typically attributed to April 23rd so that his birthday falls on another English holiday and they can both be celebrated at the same time. Now that we've looked at the biography of the two primary authors that we're going to be examining, Lady Mary Roth and William Shakespeare, let's move into the actual content of their work. And let's begin with a clip from Interstellar.
Maybe it means something more, something we can't yet understand. Maybe it's some evidence, some artifact of a higher dimension that we can't consciously perceive. I'm drawn across the universe to someone I haven't seen in a decade, who I know is probably dead. Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space. Maybe we should trust that, even if we can't understand it yet.
Dear eyes, how well indeed you do adorn that blessed sphere which gazing souls hold dear, the loved place of sought-for triumphs, near the court of glory, where love's force was born. How may they term you April's sweetest morn, when pleasing looks from those bright lights appear a sunshine day, from clouds and mists still clear, kind nursing fires for wishes yet unborn. Two stars of heaven sent down to grace the earth, placed in that throne which gives all joys their birth, shining and burning, pleasing yet their charms, which wounding even in hurts are deemed delights. So pleasant is their force, so great their mights, as happy they can triumph in their harms.
That was Lady Roth's number 2. Think about the descriptions here. Love is attached a predominant attribute, radiance. Love here is described as shining and burning. Shining and burning. It's powerful descriptors. Also in the poem, we see love as personified by two separate individuals, two stars of heaven. These could possibly be Lady Roth's husband, Robert Roth, and an unknown other individual I could have missed while reading her biography. The sonnet is overall positive, even with such fierce descriptors as burning. Lady Roth, if we attribute her directly as the narrator, has a sort of beaming view of love. Actually, I wouldn't necessarily say beaming, it's associated with radiance, but more so divine. There's a divinity attached to love in this sonnet. But does the bard share this sentiment? Let's have a look.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee.
One of Shakespeare's most popular sonnets, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? It's iconic, it's very grand. The narrator, shall we say, Shakespeare, is talking directly to the subject, almost as if I am you. But the subject, the prose feels grand and personal at the same time. He feels like he's talking directly to the subject, but is also on a grand scale, stage, if you will, speaking to the world. But more than that, the sonnet expounds permanence, and this is important. The subject will always be as the summer day is. But this is important. The subject of permanence is important to this sonnet. It's representative of a eternal sort of love. And that is what's important about this sonnet and the sonnet before it, is its sort of joyous, overall positive view of love. Let's look at both. There are immediate comparisons. Shakespeare's Buds of May to Roth's April's Sweetest Morn. two stars of heaven, too hot the eye of heaven shines, shining and burning. Each of the authors have an unambiguous depiction of love here, an almost blinding radius. But why the interstellar clip? Why did I include the interstellar clip at the beginning of this chapter? Because the interstellar clip, though tonally different, is exhibiting the same fundamental principles that Roth and Shakespeare are striving to convey. Dr. Brand's understanding of love is grand, eternal. If we were to subtract what makes this portion of Interstellar a movie, cinematography, spoken word, ambient sound, and just look at the words, it's easy to see how it fits in line with the sonnets. But the important thing here is that all of the authors are exhibiting the same thing, an overall positive view of love as wondrous and radiant. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So where to from here? Well, I'll let my favorite composer take us to the next chapter.
Melancholia is a stage wherein the red, yellow, and green sulfurs are being heated, wherein the alembic is being submitted to a fire. And you see the angel looking ennuyé, filled, right? As though everything that it has, all the uses of this world, this universe, are stale to it. Melancholia is the loss of importance of all the things that we thought were previously important. It is not a state of depression. It's an intermediate state. It's a state much akin to several of the alchemical phases. In this instance, even your own mind and spirit won't comply with what you supposedly want. You become melancholic, despondent, filled with despair. For who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life? Yes.
Am I thus conquered? Have I lost the powers, that to withstand which joys to ruin me? Must I be still, while it my strength devours, and captive leads me prisoner, bound, unfree? Love first shall leave men's fantasies to them free. Desire shall quench love's flames, spring, hate sweet showers. Love shall loose all his darts, have sight, and see his shame and wishings hinder happy hours. Why should we not love's purblind charms resist? Must we be servile, doing what he list? No, seek some host to harbour thee. I fly thy babish tricks, and freedom do profess. But oh, my hurt makes my lost heart confess. I love, and must. So farewell, liberty.
That was Lady Ross number 14. Let's look at that first line for a moment. Am I thus conquered? It's powerful. Pulls the reader into the poem immediately and establishes the tone right off the bat. But overall, does the poem have to do with melancholy? I think yes, but more so at the moment with what we're talking about, it's more so about futility. The last line, I love, and I must, so farewell liberty, represents a sort of enslavement to love by the author, Lady Mary Roth. The melancholy in this depiction of love comes not from the futility I mentioned, but from the narrator's perpetual gloom. It's created by the first line. This perpetual gloom is created by the first line. The narrator is exasperated. Am I thus conquered? Look at the language. And capture leads me prisoner bound, unfree. The narrator's enslavement to love has created an inescapable melancholy.
The other two, slight air and purging fire, are both with thee, wherever I abide. The first my thought, the other my desire. these present absent with swift motion slide. For when these quicker elements are gone, in tender embassy of love to thee, my life, being made of four with two alone, sinks down to death, oppressed with melancholy. Until life's composition be recured by those swift messengers returned from thee, who even but now come back again assured of thy fair health, recounting it to me. This told, I joy, but then no longer glad. I send them back again, and straight grow sad.
That was Shakespeare's Sonnet 45. I sort of cheated with the sonnet, right? It directly calls out melancholy, oppressed by melancholy. The narrator here is melancholic because he is plagued by thoughts of someone he loves. The sorrow is temporarily alleviated when he hears back from people he sends out to learn more information about the one he loves, well-being, as in the lines about health. Elements hold a prominent role in this sonnet, particularly fire and air. You could safely assume, as it is not sparsely attributed, that fire is desire or longing. The continual state of gloom experienced by the author here persists because of longing for one he doesn't readily see or communicate with. The similarity between Roth and Shakespeare here is the looming nature of love over them. Roth is more aggressive, though, chastising love and its hold over her. Shakespeare is more akin to being imprisoned, shackled by the love that he can't see. This creates a melancholic stasis for both authors. Saltillo's track serves as a vehicle for introducing you to melancholy in the event that any of you are unfamiliar. It doesn't necessarily tie into the melancholy on display by Roth and Shakespeare so much as it counters it. Saltillo's, or Minton Matthews III's version of melancholy, depicts a loss of importance rather than a state of depression.
Death is a disease. It's like any other. And there's a cure. A cure. And I will find it.
Sleep, fie, possess me not, nor do not fright me with thy heavy and thy death-like might, for counterfeitings vilder than death's sight, and such deluding more my thoughts do spite. Thou sufferest falsest shapes my soul to fright, sometimes in likeness of a hopeful sprite, and oft times like my love, as in despite, joying thou canst with malice kill delight. When I, a poor fool made by thee, think joy doth flow, when thy fond shadows do destroy my that while senseless self, left free to thee. But now, do well, let me for ever sleep, and so for ever that dear image keep, or still wake that my senses may be free.
That was Lady Mary Roth's number 16. There's a destructive nature to this poem. Death like might, malice killed delight, shadows does destroy, death's sight. We might be able to see this as a progression from number 14 in the previous section. Roth, the narrator, is sort of accepting the darkness, welcoming death in a way. Let me forever sleep. It's fairly clear. Death is often perceived as a release from earthly woes, and the last lines of this poem are in line with this reasoning. Despite the cheery nature of Lady Roth's number 2 that we read near the beginning, Song 1, which is present near the front of the work, says the following: "Since true love is dead, killed with unkind despair." This poem also contains the line, "and oft times like my love." Roth is describing throughout her work, it seems, the death of love. But does the bard share the same sentiment?
No longer mourn for me when I am dead, then you shall hear the surly, sullen bell give warning to the world that I am fled from this vile world with vilest worms to dwell. Nay, if you read this line, remember not the hand that writ it, for I love you so that I in your sweet thoughts would be forgot, if thinking on me then should make you woe. Oh, if, I say, you look upon this verse, when I perhaps compounded am with clay, do not so much as my poor name rehearse, but let your love, even with my life, decay, lest the wise world should look into your moan, and mock you with me after I am gone.
That was Shakespeare's Sonnet 71. I'm fascinated by this sonnet. ShakespeareSonnets.com notes a particular facet of this sonnet. You cannot read a poem which asks you to forget its writer without at the same time having memory of that writer continuously thrust into your thoughts. It's an interesting notion. The narrator here is exhibiting a calculated pessimism with a grandstanding ovation to his love. It's incongruous, and maybe that's what draws me to it. This notion of diametrically opposed feelings, possessing a great love and a great desire to be forgotten by that love, seems to justify this notion of macro negativity from this vile world with the vilest worms to dwell. Because love, to Shakespeare, Roth, Brand, Thomas, to me, is inherently personal, which is why I chose to couple this section with The Fountain. Darren Aronofsky's film is a beautiful execution of life, death, love, and eternity, and it's the fountain that can bring everything that we've talked about together. All of the sonnets and poems we've discussed exhibit a profound understanding of their subject matter, which is love, but they all depict personal love, even though the narrators in all the works stand as orators, expounding their beliefs from the joyous in Roth's number 2 and Shakespeare's Sonnet 18 to their crippling feelings in 14 and Sonnet 45. The Fountain is the perfect allegory for what Roth and Shakespeare, or the narrators, are trying to say. The main character's, Thomas, or Tomas's, love for Isabel, or Izzy, is all-consuming, destructive even. The various time periods depicted in the film attribute an eternal nature to love, as one of our authors does, specifically Shakespeare. The distinct difference lies in Roth and the evolution of her poetry throughout the work. Roth begins with a notion that love is joyous and forever. Her work whittles away at the notion that love is always joyous. In The Fountain, Rachel Weisz's character is afflicted with an inoperable brain tumor. Izzy's tumor in the film is analogous to Roth's whittling of happiness and love that can be seen as you progress through Pamphylia to Amphilanthus. Whereas Thomas is more like Shakespeare's sonnets. Even though he is afflicted by desperation, melancholy, and tragedy, love persists eternally, even through death, for Thomas and Shakespeare. Throughout all the experiences our authors have, whether joyous, negative, melancholic, our authors cling to the idea that love is profoundly personal and all-consuming. I'll leave you with this.
Then you shall take this ring to remind you of your promise. You shall wear it when you find Eden. And when you return, I shall be your Eve. Together we will live forever.